All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're going to be taking a look at how kids actually learn to revise their writing.
Cool.
Yeah, it's you sent over this paper by Carol R. Beal. It's from 1996
Yeah.
called The Role of Comprehension Monitoring in Children's Revision. And really, I think our goal today is going to be to unpack why revising is tough for kids in the first place,
Right.
and then what role, their understanding of their writing plays in them getting better at it. So kind of like the metacognitive angle.
Yeah, so this deep dive is going to be looking at this paper, which is itself a review of a lot of the research in educational psychology, specifically looking at how children's ability to kind of monitor their own understanding of text impacts their ability to revise what they've written.
Right.
So it's all about kind of like how kids make sense of language
Yeah.
and how that influences how they refine their own written communication.
And I think this is relevant to a lot of people, right? I mean,
Darling.
if you're a parent who's helping your kid with their homework,
Yeah.
or a teacher trying to figure out how to make their students better at writing,
Absolutely.
or just anyone who's interested in learning, I think this offers some really interesting insights into how kids think, how we learn to think, like metacognition.
Yeah.
And I think it really highlights this crucial link between understanding something
Yeah.
and being able to communicate it effectively.
I think what's interesting right off the bat in this paper is just this puzzle that Beal points out,
Okay.
which is that you see kids in classrooms where they're getting a lot of support, and it seems like they're very capable writers.
Yeah.
They're revising their work and they're engaging with the process, but then you see them in like a more formal testing situation where maybe they're not getting as much support.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden their writing, especially when it comes to revision, seems very limited.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
So it's like, are they really good at revising or not?
Right. It seems like there are two different levels of ability almost,
Right.
depending on the context. And that really suggests, right, that the environment and the level of support that children have makes a huge impact
For sure.
on their apparent ability to write well.
Yeah. And I think that gets to kind of the heart of our deep dive here,
Yeah.
which is that we're really focusing on revision as this key writing skill.
Right.
And more specifically on how children's developing ability to monitor their comprehension,
Mm.
right? So their ability to basically check their understanding of the text, both like when they're reading somebody else's text and their own text,
Yeah.
that directly affects how well they're able to revise. It's really about, thinking about that internal reader they have.
Right. So let's get into some of the meat of this.
Yeah.
What does the research say about why it's so difficult for young writers to revise effectively?
Well, consistently, the research finds that young children are very often reluctant to revise without some very strong encouragement.
Yeah.
So they're not just naturally inclined to go back and make changes.
It's not intuitive.
It's not intuitive. And even when they do revise, often the changes that they're making aren't actually improving the clarity or quality for the reader.
Right. So they're almost revising for the teacher, right? Like,
Right.
I revised it, but it's not actually, they're not identifying what actually needs fixing.
Totally. And I think this is where the idea of comprehension monitoring really comes in.
Okay.
So Beal describes this as this ongoing assessment of one's own understanding while you're reading,
Yeah.
recognizing when you fail to understand, so it's like that little red flag that goes up in your mind
Okay.
when you're reading and something just doesn't click.
Gotcha. Now, that makes sense when you're reading someone else's work,
Yeah.
but when you're looking at your own writing, you kind of already know what you meant to say.
And that's a key point, right? Because for effective revision, a writer has to be able to read their own text like they've never seen it before, as if they're a naive reader. So they have to be able to anticipate where another reader might get confused, where things might be unclear, and then change the text to make it better. And this really depends on comprehension monitoring.
Yeah. Being able to take that step back
Yeah.
and read your own work as if you don't know what it means, which sounds a lot harder than it sounds.
It is.
Especially for a kid.
Yeah, and I think a really fundamental challenge for young writers is grasping that their writing is just a representation of what they meant to say. It's not the meaning itself.
Right.
Right. So the words on the page are how they try to get across an idea,
Yeah.
but the reader has to actively construct meaning from that,
Right.
drawing on their own knowledge, making inferences, and so on.
Yeah. So the writing's like the instructions,
Right.
not the finished
Exactly.
So if kids don't fully understand that their words aren't a perfect copy of their thoughts.
Yeah.
How does that impact their ability to identify problems in what they've written?
Yeah. And one of the key takeaways is that young kids often think what they meant to say is exactly what they did say.
Right.
And that's a huge kind of disconnect when it comes to revision.
Yeah, yeah.
And so research suggests that young children often don't clearly distinguish between the literal words on the page and their own intended meaning.
Hmm.
They kind of see it as all the same thing.
Yeah.
And Beale gives this example of, imagine a puppet saying to a child, pick the red one, and there's a red triangle and a red circle.
Right.
Well, many young children will think that saying pick the red circle is exactly the same instruction.
Interesting.
Because for them, what they understood to be meant is the same as what was actually said.
Right. So as long as they can figure out what their own unclear message means,
Right.
they assume it's perfectly clear.
Exactly.
They're not distinguishing between the text and what was in their head.
Exactly. As long as they understand it, they think it's fine.
Right. And so this makes it very difficult for them to see when their writing might be confusing for someone else to read.
Exactly.
So what are some of the research examples?
Yeah, so there's this thing called the error detection paradigm,
Okay.
which is basically a way to study how well people can spot mistakes in texts.
Okay.
And they've done a lot of these studies with children.
Hmm.
And what they find consistently is that children often overestimate how clear a text is,
Yeah.
even when the text has deliberate errors in it.
Wow.
So they tend to believe they understand even unclear material.
Interesting.
And they don't readily identify inconsistencies or missing information.
Now, they're not just, they will point out other problems though, right?
They will, and that's a really important point.
Okay.
So it's not like they're unwilling to criticize. They
Uh-huh.
might say, oh, this paragraph is too long, or this is a boring topic.
Okay.
But they very rarely point out that something just doesn't make sense. So again, it highlights that difficulty in seeing actual comprehension problems in the text itself.
Okay, now these studies have kids looking at other people's writing.
Right.
Is it even harder when they're trying to evaluate your own work?
Absolutely. It's way harder for them to evaluate their own writing for clarity
Yeah.
because they already know what they meant to communicate.
Right. They have that insider knowledge.
Yeah, so it's really hard for them to take that step back
Yeah.
and see it from the perspective of somebody who doesn't have that background knowledge.
Right. It's like trying to be surprised by a magic trick when you know how it's done.
Exactly.
Okay. So lack of comprehension monitoring makes it difficult to spot problems.
Yeah.
But even if a child does realize that something in their writing isn't clear, does that automatically mean they'll know how to fix it?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
So being able to identify a problem is a crucial first step for revision,
Right.
but it doesn't automatically mean that a child can revise it effectively. They might see something's wrong, but not know how to make it right.
So comprehension monitoring is necessary but not sufficient.
Exactly.
Okay. So what happens when the researchers specifically ask kids not just to find the errors, but to fix them?
Yeah, so there have been studies where children were asked to find and fix things like inconsistencies or anomalies, contradictions
Okay.
in prepared texts.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found, which I think is interesting, is that once a child actually detected a problem in the text,
Yeah.
they were often able to suggest a relevant revision.
Oh, okay.
So it really suggests that the main hurdle is really identifying the problem.
Gotcha.
Once they see it, they often have an idea of how to correct it.
So it's not a lack of writing skill. It's a lack of detection.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned inferences, reading between the lines.
Yeah.
How does that play into all of this?
So the ability to make inferences while reading can actually support both comprehension monitoring
Yeah.
and generating ideas for revision.
That-
So when a child makes an inference, it can help
Mhm.
them notice when something is missing in the text and suggest how to fill the gap.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that, when the researchers actually pointed out the problems to the children,
Yeah.
they were less likely to come up with good revisions
Oh, wow.
than when they identified the issues themselves.
So their own aha moment was more powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. Now, what about familiarity with the topic?
Yeah.
Does that make a difference in a child's ability to revise?
Absolutely. So The research really shows that how familiar a child is with the topic
Hmm.
is closely tied to how successful they are at both comprehension monitoring and revision.
Okay.
So they're much better at identifying and fixing problems in stories with familiar themes,
Yeah.
where they can easily make relevant inferences.
Right.
They struggle more with unfamiliar topics where they don't have the background knowledge to understand the inconsistencies.
That makes sense. If you don't know anything about something, you're not going to be able to tell when something's wrong.
Exactly. In fact, Beale gives this example from the research where, it's like a story about Kate in a train
Hmm.
versus a paragraph about ants finding their way home.
Okay.
And children were much more successful at revising the story
Yeah.
because they could use their general knowledge about the world to imagine solutions to the problem in the narrative.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So unfamiliar topics create a double whammy.
Yeah.
It's harder to spot the problem, harder to fix it. Now, you talk about texts that could have more than one meaning
Right.
and the challenges that those present.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
So sometimes a text isn't necessarily wrong, but it can be interpreted in more than one way.
Hmm.
And revising for this requires the writer to really consider all the different ways somebody might understand what they've written,
Yeah.
and then clarify the text to guide the reader to the intended meaning.
Right. So it's not about fixing a mistake. It's about making sure your message lands
Exactly.
the way you want it to.
Exactly.
How does this play out with children?
Well, so Beale talks about two main types of this ambiguity: referential ambiguity and interpretive ambiguity.
Oh.
So referential ambiguity is when a word or a phrase could refer to more than one thing.
Like, put it there without pointing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so young children, as we discussed earlier, often overestimate how clear those messages are.
Right.
They might kind of subconsciously notice the ambiguity, but they don't always recognize it as a potential problem for the reader.
Gotcha.
However, when they are prompted to revise, they often can suggest appropriate fixes
Okay.
once the ambiguity is pointed out to them.
So the red one is an example of referential ambiguity.
Exactly.
One could be multiple things.
Exactly.
Okay. And then interpretive ambiguity.
Yeah, so interpretive ambiguity is a little bit more complex. This arises when there are multiple potential relationships between the ideas in a text. So Beale gives this example. I think it's in the appendix.
Yeah.
It's a story about a sandcastle that got smashed.
Okay.
And the story mentions, that there were big waves
Mm-hmm.
and that the kid's brother was playing nearby.
Right.
And then the sandcastle gets smashed.
Yeah.
So you, as the reader, have to infer.
Was it the waves or the brother?
Exactly, yeah, what caused it. The text doesn't explicitly say.
Right. So the ambiguity is in the connection between the events, not in a single word.
Exactly.
Okay. So how did children handle this kind of ambiguity?
Well, what they find is that older elementary school students are better at identifying these multiple potential interpretations than younger students.
Right.
And this difficulty seems to be linked to their developing understanding of the role of inference in comprehension.
Right.
So younger children tend to attribute their own inferences, like the connections they make, to understand the story directly to the text. So they basically assume that the information they inferred was actually explicitly stated in the text.
So if they inferred that the brother knocked it over,
Right.
they believe the story said the brother knocked it over,
Exactly.
even if it didn't.
Exactly, yeah. They're attributing their own thinking to the text.
Gotcha.
And this can really hinder their ability to recognize when their writing might be unclear to somebody who doesn't make the same assumptions.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about different types of writing?
Yeah.
Does the genre, like a story versus an explanation, affect this at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. And interestingly, research suggests that narratives seem to be better at promoting the recognition of multiple interpretations than expository texts, which are, those texts that are meant to explain things.
Yeah.
And this might be because, children have different expectations for these different genres.
Right.
Or it could be that narratives naturally encourage more relational and inferential processing. And, often familiarity with the topic plays a role here.
Yeah.
Because kids tend to write narratives about things they know a lot about.
So like a kid might be more likely to see different ways to interpret a story they wrote about their pet
Right.
than an explanation they wrote about photosynthesis.
Exactly. So now, given all these challenges, the research has also looked at whether these comprehension monitoring skills can actually be taught.
Oh,
What's the good news there?
yeah. Was the good news.
There is good news.
Okay.
So research shows that comprehension monitoring skills can be taught directly,
Oh,
and studies have shown that training children to actively question the text and monitor their understanding
yeah.
can lead to significant improvements in their ability to recognize text problems and to revise more effectively.
Oh, wow. So even if they don't have it naturally,
Yeah,
it can be taught.
it can be taught, yeah.
Okay, great. So what's an example of what this training looks like? Like, what are some specific things that parents or teachers could do?
Yeah, so often it involves teaching children specific strategies to use while they're reading.
Okay.
So, for example, asking themselves questions about the text, like, does this make sense?
Mhm.
Or what's the main idea here?
Gotcha.
Another strategy is to have them try to summarize what they've read
Okay.
or to predict what's going to happen next
Yeah.
and to try to identify anything that's confusing them.
Okay.
For parents, even just something as simple as reading together and pausing every so often and asking your child to explain what's happening or what they
Yeah.
think might happen next can be really helpful for building these skills.
Yeah, yeah.
And teachers can do things like having students read a paragraph with a deliberate error in it
Mm-hmm.
and have them try to identify and explain why it's a problem.
Yeah.
So these kinds of things really encourage them to actively engage with the text and become more aware of their own understanding.
To make that inner reader more
Exactly.
critical.
Exactly.
Now, going back to that puzzle we talked about in the beginning,
Yeah.
that difference between how kids write in supportive classrooms
Right.
versus formal assessments.
Yeah.
How does this understanding of comprehension monitoring help explain that difference?
So it seems like a key factor is the level of support
Okay.
for comprehension monitoring and revision that they're getting.
Gotcha.
So in classrooms where teachers are really actively emphasizing these skills,
Yeah.
where they're providing prompts and guidance,
Mm-hmm.
children are more likely to engage in that kind of critical reading of their own work
Okay.
that leads to more effective revision.
Right.
But this kind of support might be missing in those more formal assessment settings.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that might explain that drop in performance.
So the classroom environment is kind of making up for,
Yeah.
they're still developing internal comprehension monitoring skills.
Exactly. The teacher is basically acting as that more critical reader.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So I think we've covered a lot. Let's recap. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive?
Yeah, so I think a key takeaway is that, children's ability to revise their writing is really deeply connected to their ability to understand text from a reader's perspective. And this comprehension monitoring, as it's called, is a really fundamental metacognitive skill
Yeah.
that develops over time. And it can be influenced by instruction, by how familiar they are with the topic and the genre and all these things.
Right.
And I think, the main challenge often isn't that children can't make changes to their writing.
Right.
It's that they have a really hard time recognizing what needs to be changed.
Because they haven't separated their intended meaning from the actual words.
Exactly.
They just assume that everyone else understands what they meant
Yeah.
because they understand it.
And I think this has some pretty big implications,
Yeah.
not just for teaching kids how to write, but also for all of us as communicators.
Yeah. I mean, I catch myself sometimes thinking, I've been perfectly clear.
Yeah.
When clearly the person I'm talking to hasn't understood.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our provocative thought for today.
Okay, maybe.
If we know that young writers overestimate the clarity of their own work
Yeah.
because they conflate their intended meaning with the literal text,
Yeah.
how often might we be doing the same thing
That's interesting.
in our own communication, both written and spoken?
Yeah.
Could a more conscious effort
Mm-hmm.
at comprehension monitoring our own messages
Yeah.
actually lead to clearer and more effective communication
Right.
in all aspects of our lives?
Really interesting to think about.
Yeah, and I think this deep dive into these challenges that
Mhm.
young writers face
Yeah.
gives us all a really powerful lens for examining our own processes
Yeah.
of understanding and expression.
Absolutely. If you want to dig deeper into this topic, Carol Beal's paper is a great starting point.
Yeah, and she cites a lot of other studies
Right.
in educational psychology. So we
Right.
really encourage you to, look at those linked references and explore further.
Yeah. It might give you some insights into how you communicate and how you learn.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep thinking critically about how we understand and communicate.